Hi, my name is Henry Rausch. I am a retired commander from the U.S. Navy Reserves. I spent 11 years active duty on submarines and then 11 years in the reserves. I retired in 2005 and I published a book just recently on my experiences on my first submarine. It's called Submerged: Life on a Fast Attack Submarine in the Last Days of the Cold War. And I publish it for several audiences, one of which is for submariners, but another larger audience is for people who might not know anything about submarines at all, might be interested in the world. It's very, very different than what you see on a Tom Clancy or a thriller type book. And I thought I would tell you about three different aspects of the book that I think you might be interested in. I was attached to a fast attack submarine that conducted four classified missions in the latter part of the 1980s before the Berlin Wall fell. And we did several classified missions to the Barents Sea, one to the North Pole, and then we went to the Mediterranean several times. It's been approved by the DoD for release, and I hope you find it interesting. The three things I'd like to talk about very quickly today are one, the isolation on board a submarine. It's much more isolating than space travel. Everyone thinks of an astronaut being isolated, but in a very real respect, they're not. They're talking to people all the time. For example, they're on the email all the time. They talk to their families every day. They talk to ham radio people. They talk to mission control. Um, in contrast, submariners, when we went on a mission, we never transmitted at all for months and months because it would, if we had broken radio silence, it would have given the enemy our position. And we could receive messages, but only at a very limited rate. And the reason for that is because we were so far north, the satellites did not work. The satellites we used were equatorial. And north of about 65 degrees north, we could not receive the satellite signals, so we're limited to something called a VLF, which is very low frequency, around 10 or 15 kilohertz. And the data rate was about as fast as you could type, around there. So we get maybe a dozen pages on a broadcast, and that was it. So we really didn't have any news. We had maybe some headlines and news, but that was it. We were very, very isolated. We might get a couple of messages. They called them familygrams, from our families. Sometimes not, depending if the broadcast would allow it. But it's extremely isolating. I tell people it's kind of like going into a coma for 3 months and waking up after 3 months. So imagine shooting this in January. Imagine you've gone into a coma in October, and you wake up now, and what's changed. The Commanders won the playoffs. Donald Trump is going to be president. I think all things changed since October. You'd have no idea of. So that's the first thing. It's a very isolating experience. The second thing I'd like to talk about is atmospheric control. We would go on a mission, and our atmosphere would completely separate from the outside world for about 85 days usually. We could stay submerged easily about 90 days, and we started to run out of food. And I talk about that in the book, how we ran out of a lot of food on one trip. We ran out of coffee, we ran out of sugar, we ran out of bread. We didn't have much left to eat at the end of the run. Um, so because you're isolated, you need to make your own air and control your atmosphere. And one of the things I want to talk about was carbon dioxide. There's a lot of talk about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today because of global warming. We breathe about 20 times the concentration of the carbon dioxide in the air you and I are breathing right now. Give you an idea, we had scrubbers that would take the carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere, but they only worked down to about 3 or 3.5 millimeters of mercury. Millimeter of mercury is a measure of pressure. Atmospheric pressure is normally 760 millimeters of mercury. To give you an idea, so we'd normally maintain the carbon dioxide level about 4 millimeters of mercury in the boat. To give you an idea, the atmospheric pressure of carbon dioxide we're breathing right now is 0.23 millimeters of mercury, so about 20 times. So we would breathe 20 times the level of carbon dioxide that you and I are breathing right now. And that didn't have a whole lot of effect. One of the main effects it did have, though, was it made our blood very acidic, and wounds would heal very slowly because of the high carbon dioxide content. And the third thing I'd like to tell you about is navigation. There's one of our runs, we went to the North Pole. We surfaced 13 times under the ice. One very near the North Pole, not quite at it though, and then we were on a classified mission. It remains classified this day, but we surfaced through the ice a good deal. Navigation is very, very different than you might think of. For one thing, people think of like following a compass, or on ships we have gyro compasses. Well, the first thing about going to the North Pole is gyro compasses do not work past about 88 degrees north latitude. And the reason they don't is because gyro compasses depend on two things: gravity, which is up there at North Pole, and the Earth spinning. And the Earth does not spin at the North Pole because it's spinning on its axis, and the rotation rate gets lower and lower the farther north you go. So gyro compasses do not work. Even if they did work, they wouldn't have been any use though, and the reason is because when you think of a heading, like say I'm going west 270, that's an angle to a meridian, and a meridian is a line of longitude. That makes sense to talk about that when you're in the lower latitudes, because the lines of longitude are roughly parallel. We're all familiar with the Mercator projection. The farther north you go, the more the curvature of the Earth, all the meridians come together at a point at the North Pole. And so if you try to head west, for example, from line of longitude, the instant you step off that meridian, you're not heading west anymore. You're heading somewhere south of west because how the lines of longitude are curved. So really, directions are kind of useless up there. So we use a system called inertial navigation to navigate up there, and it was very complex. What we do is move the North Pole, down from the North Pole down the international date line to the equator, and use that as our reference point, so that the lines of longitude that we were using would be parallel, and it would be easy to make directions. So those are just three kind of things that you might not, there's a lot of other things you'll find in the book. I try to write it, like I said, for submariners and also for people who know nothing about submarines that wanted to know something about that world that you might not be exposed to just from watching, I don't know, Hunt for Red October, which is a decent movie, don't get me wrong. But the real world is actually more fascinating. And thank you for your time. This is the book. It's Submerged, Life on a Fast Attack Submarine in the Last